I think initially they were kind of like, what the hell is this woman doing? But then when they see the effect, I mean, so often for people who haven't been educated on this whole nervous system attunement, the tendency is to, like, if the child's on the floor, stand over them,
Right.
or raise their voice, or threaten them, or promise them something in the future. So I do a lot of education around teachers, getting on the kids' level, bringing your voice down, recognizing where they are in the brain. Is it past, present, or future? Like, what are they capable of based on where the nervous system is at that time?
Our guest today is Kelly Vagts, LCSW. Kelly provides therapy services in a rural public school district to children ages 5 to 17 who are at or below poverty level, and often with developmental trauma histories. Trained in neurofeedback, QEEG, EMDR, Synergetic Play Therapy, and IFS, she integrates her understanding of the EEG, neuroscience, neurofeedback, and attuned attachment-based therapy. So Kelly, thank you. Oh, let you finish taking a sip.
Sorry.
So we don't start with a choking episode. Thank you so much for coming today on the Neurofeed. And I'm super excited about this conversation that we're going to have today. And I wonder, just starting out with some basics, when people come to you for neurofeedback who are not familiar with it, how do you describe it to new patients or clients or folks?
Well, because I work with children primarily, I have to find a very simple way to explain it. And so I tried it for kids. I often hear the car analogy or the symphony analogy, but for kids, I talk about riding a bike and the pedaling and then the braking, and that we're trying to make their pedaling be as smooth as possible without slamming on the brakes or going so fast that they no longer can feel that their pedals are controlling the bike when they just spin. And with parents, I usually bring them in and I give them an example of what it looks like. I show them the actual sensors and where they're possibly going to go and all of the materials that I use to do that. And then I have to explain that it's not going to be as quick as medication, because oftentimes I'm asking parents to hold off on medication and give neurofeedback a try because the kids are so young, and that it takes time. And just like learning a new skill or going to the gym, it takes time to build muscle, but it also creates, it takes time to create new neural networks and connections in the brain.
What inspired you to start exploring neurofeedback? What was the thing that kind of got you interested in taking a look at this?
My motivating factor always is that due to the demographic that I work with, the complexity of symptoms and the level of trauma that I see, I didn't feel like I was effective in my work. And my motivation was to really help alleviate the level of suffering that these children and families are going through. And so my initial introduction to it was Bessel van der Kolk and The Body Keeps the Score. And soon after his book came out, I went to a 2-day conference, and that's where I was introduced to neurofeedback and EMDR. And then I started looking at cost. So I started with EMDR. And then I was at a conference to learn about using EMDR with children or training. And there were 3 women sitting in front of me that had just done a training with Dr. Ed Hamlin and Dr. Mary Ammerman. And I got information from them, and I was flying to Asheville a few months later to go to their introductory course. So,
and when you first started using neurofeedback, either on yourself or on friends and family, was there a moment when you were like, oh my goodness, this is the thing? Or was it more sort of a gradual dawning awareness, like, oh, this is really having an impact?
I would say that I definitely drank the Kool-Aid with my first training. And I saw some pretty instantaneous changes in my own brain. Um, I think I've ebbed and flowed because the severity of my caseload. I don't often see the amazing results that you hear about in other forums or places. And so, I remember Dr. Hamlin said at the end of the training, like, just enough. Well, the severity of the symptoms that brought you here, the clients that you're thinking of in your head, you don't know enough yet to work with those. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my whole caseload. But I think that after maybe 6 months of working with some of my severest kids and seeing the glimpses of ease that they were having, I can't imagine doing my work without it.
Interesting. And overall, like with working with families, do you train the parents as well as the kids? No.
Unfortunately, I don't have the time. And because I'm employed by a public school district, my ultimate, the overarching goal that's presented to the school board and the superintendent is that my work with kids will help them to be more regulated in the classroom. So ultimately they can learn, and they can also not inhibit the learning of other students in the class. And so I can only work with children at this time, but there are a couple of practitioners in the community that are doing neurofeedback now. So I try to get parents to do it, but most of the kids that I work with are at or below poverty level. So their parents aren't able to afford what it costs to do neurofeedback in the private sector.
Maybe could you talk a little bit about what doing, because I don't think there are a lot of folks who are doing neurofeedback in a school setting the way that you're doing it. How did that come about? That was you brought that to the school.
Yeah. I think because, so we did a pilot program in 2014, and I took the class with Dr. Hamlin and Dr. Ammerman in the fall of 2015. And then I fundraised to buy the equipment and started actually working with kids in the school in January of 2016. So I had, like a year and a half where the teachers and the school board and the superintendent I had a relationship with them. We're in a very rural area, and so our funding is small, and they had never had any type of support services, really, especially for mental health and social emotional issues. And so once I developed that relationship, and they just saw me as somebody that could help make their job easier, especially teachers, it was like, whatever I wanted to do, they just trusted me. So I don't have the same barriers that a lot of practitioners reach out to me and ask, how are you doing this? How did you make it happen in the school? What did you do? And I always encourage them to establish relationships with the teachers and the principals and the school board and the superintendents. Like, that's the number one thing. And if they trust you and they trust that you have the best intent for their children within their district, there's a good chance they're going to let you bring it in. So that's how I started. And now, however many years later, I'm actually getting referrals just for neurofeedback from parents. So it's finally, like, the word is finally out in our community.
That's great. And do you get feedback also from the teachers that the changes that are happening for the students are noticed?
It depends on the teacher and it depends on the student. Like I said, the severity of where we live, we have the fourth highest rate of intergenerational poverty in the state, our county, and we also have a really high rate of intergenerational trauma. And so, I think part of it's from my work with 𝘁𝗲𝘄𝗃, but like working in the realm of subtlety. And so oftentimes my job is a teacher will be like, the kid still isn't sitting, like still can't sit through their math lesson. And I have to be like, yeah, but they're sitting there for 10 minutes. Right. And so I think that we have an ongoing relationship, and they set some of the goals in our treatment plan. And then I try to bring them back to reality and help them to see the smaller goals. Like, if they have a tic where they are screaming out in class, I have to remind them, well, it's happening less frequent, or, maybe they're not talking as loud, or they're still disrupting, but they're not hitting their neighbor anymore. So just trying to get them to understand the subtleties of
Right.
of neurofeedback and behavior change, and that it takes time. I was like, I'm not Jesus, like I'm just this person out here trying to help kids feel better.
Right. So it sounds like there's a good bit of sort of psychoeducation that happens with the other folks who are working with these kids.
Constant, yes. And parents as well. I feel parents, and I'm sure that people that are in private practice have this as well. You set up the original treatment plan, and that those goals are met, and then the parents are like, yeah, but this is still happening, and yeah, but this is still happening, and just bringing them back to, yes, but look where we were when we started, and look what's happening, right? They're sleeping 3 hours stretches rather than only sleeping for an hour, and they're eating these other foods, and they're willing to wear t-shirts with tags, whatever the thing is. Just going back and reminding them of what the child has done and accomplished through neurofeedback.
And would you say that your sense of how that process of recovery or growth for the student, your sense of that has changed during doing neurofeedback? Has neurofeedback brought you a greater awareness, or is that something that you started with somewhat or entirely before you began engaging in neurofeedback? I'm just wondering if, for a lot of practitioners, sometimes the sense of the sort of neurophysiological basis and the sort of the oscillatory nature of dysfunction in behavior, for example, that seems to shift the more folks work with neurofeedback. Would you say that that's been true for you?
100%. Yes. And I would say it's been 𝙬𝗓𝙯. Like, she has just, she's changed my life. And not only my life as a human being, but my life as a practitioner, to really be able to see those subtleties, and look for the nuances, figure out where, what protocol is going to be best to, the biggest bang for the buck, or the symptom that is causing the most suffering for the child. And I think, I feel like for me, so it was EMDR first and then neurofeedback, but I think that any additional modalities that I've trained in, I always come to it with a neurofeedback lens. And I feel like the understanding of what's happening in the nervous system through ongoing education and neurofeedback, because it's a wormhole, right? Like, there's just there's so much to know, and the more you know, the better you are at doing it, as far as the nervous system and the brain, and networks in the brain. So I think that I have that lens now, regardless of what I'm learning, and it makes me better at all of the modalities that I use, because neurofeedback is just one to help me get that nervous system to a place where then they can actually engage in other forms of therapy and heal in other ways.
Right, that makes sense. So I saw a recording of a presentation that you gave a few months ago, where you talked about sort of one of the practical applications of that, of what you're talking about, I think. A sort of pragmatic way that I think, if I remember correctly, you talked about getting down on the floor with this student to really help them to understand that you were there with them. You were next to them. I wonder if you could tell that story about, and what I'm particularly interested in, what was your thinking of, like, why this is not something that, certainly in my schooling, I never had any, not that I, had those kinds of challenges, but I certainly never felt like somebody was looking to attune with me on that kind of level. So I wonder if you can walk us through, like, what your thinking was about that.
So I think that again goes back to 𝙬𝗎𝙗's mentoring and how important that attunement is to the person that's in the brain and everything that they bring, person that's in the room and everything that they bring. And then the other, as I said, like trainings that I've done since then. So the form of play therapy that I use is called Synergetic Play Therapy. And it's very much about nervous system attunement and learning how to use your regulated nervous system to help children when they're in a dysregulated state, which we're also doing during neurofeedback. Just as a sidebar, I'm sure other practitioners have noticed this, but if I somehow get distracted while I'm running a neurofeedback session with a child, their theta immediately starts, like they start going off. So if I have to keep my nervous system attuned and present while they're training, and then that's how I get the greatest benefits of the session with the child. And so one of the beautiful things about working in a school is that I go to the classroom to get the kids, and the information that I gather, not only walking into the classroom and seeing what's happening right there, not only seeing what the child is doing, but how is the teacher responding to the child? How are the other children responding to the child? And then the walk from the classroom to my office. So I'm able to tell so much, like, are they touching everything? What does their gait look like? Are they super hyper? Are they really under aroused that day? How, what's the tone of their voice? What's the pressure in their speech? So I have this like 3 to 5 minutes of really getting an idea of what the nervous system looks like. And sometimes we ask so much of kids, and sometimes school is really, really overwhelming. And for a lot of my kids, home life is really, really, really overwhelming. And so sometimes I have kids that like will just fall down as they're walking to class, or they'll go into another classroom and lock the door. So in the situation that you're talking about, this kid was fairly new to me and had suffered, like the first 2 years of his life were horrific. And he was 5 and had just sort of like entered foster care in another state. And he really struggled to control his body, and he fell to the ground. And I just laid on the ground with him and just kind of mimicked what he was doing, but then also did some deep breathing, monitored the way that I was talking. I talked about how I was feeling, to try to give him, his nervous system, an understanding of, I get it, even though I'm not in your body, I understand what's happening. Or sometimes, a lot of the kids that have severe trauma, transitions are really difficult. They're fine in their classrooms, but then if I hear them like going from lunch to recess, there'll be somebody that's exploding in the hallway. And so I'll go out, and then whatever they're doing, I just kind of do it with them until I can match where they're at and just sort of bring them down. So it's a huge part of my work with children and teachers, because they get dysregulated too.
Right. And I'm curious just what that, what's the interaction? What are the relational kind of components to interacting with adults who are like, oh, here is Kelly, who is just She's acting like a kid who's having, a moment. So is there
I think
disapproval or, like, well, how do you negotiate that response?
I'm going into my 10th year, so the obviously there's always new people on staff because the teachers are dropping like flies post COVID. But I think that I've always been perceived as a little odd, and so I think initially they were kind of like, "What the hell is this woman doing?" But then when they see the effect, I mean, so often for people who haven't been educated on this whole nervous system attunement, the tendency is to, like, if the child's on the floor, stand over them, or raise their voice, or threaten them, or promise them something in the future. So I do a lot of education around teachers, getting on the kids' level, bringing your voice down, recognizing where they are in the brain. Is it past, present, or future? Like, what are they capable of based on where the nervous system is at that time? They still think I'm a little wacky. They still think neurofeedback's a little wacky, but they know I'm on their side and I'm trying to make their jobs easier. So I would say 70% of them really enjoy me. And there's another 20% that are like, what the hell is she doing? And another 10% that can't stand me, but that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm just kind of imagining sort of what things look like after having done this work for a decade. This sense of like this, that you've cultivated this thing that works. It doesn't work overnight. It takes a bunch of like investment in your own energy and attention and so on. And it has, I imagine if it's like most, folks who are doing neurofeedback that I hear about, sometimes it works better than other times. And yet I wonder, like, for you, do you have this sense of like, why are there not more people doing this? And what do you do with that sense of like, why is this such a hidden gem? Like, how is it possible that I've discovered this stuff and it's not more widely understood? What are your thoughts about that?
As far as accessibility, I think it's the cost piece. I think I don't think it's just cost. I think it's cost, and I think that it is the amount of training and ongoing education you need to really be good at it. So I think those are the big barriers. Like, the only reason that we have it in this the school district has never paid for any part of the neurofeedback, whether it be my ongoing education. It's all been through me raising money outside of the school. So that's a big barrier to most of the people that I talk with. Or the practitioners want to be paid by the school district to go into the school to offer the services, right? Like, so maybe if there was a way to train people that already existed in the school district so that the school doesn't have to spend more, they just have to spend money on the equipment, and there could be somebody trained that's already salaried within the school district. So money is a barrier. And then I don't know, like, I just feel like it's human nature sometimes to be skeptical of things. And because the brain, even as much as we know, it's still such a mystery. I think that, and because of Google, you can Google the fabulous things about neurofeedback, but you can also Google really horrible things about neurofeedback, right? And so we're such like instant gratification information finders. Like, nobody wants to read anything too long, and I feel like you look for what you want to endorse. And so I always try to be pretty neutral in my approach, whether it be a new therapist that I've hired to be on our team, and I I just like bring it into our clinical meetings, and there's 2 out of 4 of us that use neurofeedback, and I make sure that we talk about it when we're staffing some cases to gently guide them in that direction. Or if I have a relationship with a prescribing physician, I try to ask them if they would be willing to work with me to titrate medication for some of the kids. But I do have to say that I feel like it's getting better. I feel like there's more and more, like it's becoming more mainstream. My son and my husband are watching this show on Netflix, and it's a reality TV show, and one of the athletes like was doing neurofeedback. And a lot of our kids, not a lot of our kids, a handful of our kids that whose parents have the means to bring them up to Salt Lake City to Primary Children's to get full psychological testing. There's a doctor up there that is not like stoked that the kids are getting neurofeedback in the schools, and have said to continue that. So that's something that I would never have seen even 5 years ago. So I feel like it's gotten better. But there's a lot more, people aren't patient, and I think a lot of times people come to us and they're already in crisis. Like I don't get kids referred to me that, their symptoms are pretty mild. Usually it's like things are totally off the charts, and they've tried all of these other things, whether it be through our community mental health center or through prescribers that take Medicaid. And then it's like, okay, let's try Kelly. And I think that neurofeedback, I don't have any of those instances where like I do 5 sessions with someone and it's this profound change, and medication can be pretty fast. And I think that sometimes, at least the families that I work with, don't have the luxury of that time, either because their kid's getting kicked out of class, or because there's so much dysregulation in the home already, and the parents don't have the skills, that they need something fast that's going to help that kid appear regulated. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about so one of the things that intimidates new users is the amount of sort of neuroscience, neuroanatomy, all of that stuff. And I remember we had a conversation, I think this was a couple of years ago, where you had a book of brain networks that you just dove in, and you were like, so I wonder if you could maybe talk about kind of how you process that, how you dealt with your own sense of like, whoa, this is a lot to understand. And if you have any words of wisdom for somebody who's like embarking on that thing and realizing, I actually do want to understand some of the neurophysiology of it all, but it's a lot. I'm not a neuroscientist, so.
I think being patient with yourself and making sure that you're you're just inputting enough information that you can actually digest it. I think that repetition is really important, at least for me and how I learn. I can't read something once. Like, it's really great if I can read something and I can be in a consulting group and I can be in another training. I think that I feel like the number one ingredient, but I don't think it's necessarily just neurofeedback. I think it's really good clinicians that are able to work with really complex humans, is a hunger for information, and like lifelong learners. I feel like that just has to be part of your makeup in order for neurofeedback to work in your practice. I think the other thing is to not get discouraged, and this I'll speak to just as a female and a middle-aged female. I had a completely separate career, and I was a later in life clinician after my previous career ended. And And there were definitely naysayers. The majority, especially if you get into the world of QEEG, the majority of practitioners are men. The majority of practitioners are older white men. And when I started embarking down that path, there were a lot of naysayers, like, oh, you're too old, or you're this, or you're that. And I think surrounding yourself with mentors and other people that can help you understand the material that you're trying to understand. I mean, I say this all the time, and I feel like when I say this, everybody's like, oh, yeah, that happens to me. In my previous life, I was a professional dancer, and you would have so many choreographers and coaches and teachers, and 10 of them could be saying the same thing. And it was the 11th person that came along and said it in a way that you were like, oh my gosh, I get it, right? So you might try 10 different mentors or 10 different consulting groups. And if you're still like, oh my gosh, this is too much, I can't get it, try an 11th person, because they might be able to explain it and say it in a way that you can kind of have those aha moments, right? Your gamma comes online and you're like, yes, oh my gosh, this makes sense. So just having that perseverance of using all your different ways to learn and to get excited about it. My gosh, it's amazing. I feel so blessed to be practicing in this day and age, where what we're learning about the brain, even though we have so far to go, it's just astounding. Every day it feels like there's an advance somewhere in the world. Somebody's doing research that teaches us something else. And I think that if we can hold on to that excitement rather than the intimidation, it helps us move forward too.
Great. I wonder if you could talk, you mentioned QEEGs, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you see when you do the work with the students. Is it a lot of 1-channel, 2-channel? Are you doing 4-channel training? Do you always do a cue before you do people? Some of those kinds of questions.
So I'm kind of transition. I've been through so many different things, because I'm always looking for, I say the Holy Grail, and I know it doesn't exist, but then I continue to, somebody will inevitably at ISNRs coming up, inevitably at ISNR, somebody's like, oh, and I'm doing this thing, and I've had 90% efficacy, and So I feel like I've tried a lot of things. And you have to figure out what's best for the population that you're working with, and the time that you have, and the structure of your practice, and also how much money you want to invest, and how much time you have to learn, because every software, every type of neurofeedback has a learning curve with it. So I did 4-channel for pre-COVID. I think I did it for maybe 8 or 9 months pre-COVID. And that was, again, I had to fundraise, because I was doing that with Dr. Kovin. And because none of the kids, all the kids that get my services, it's for free. And the school district was not going to allot a budget for me to do ongoing protocol development and consultations with Dr. Kovin. So that wasn't going to work long term for me, but I still felt like there were benefits to having a cue that I wasn't getting with trying to symptom based and what I knew about the brain and where to start. So I've gone down that road, and I'm now at the point where I'm trying to do a cue with every child that I work with, and it doesn't totally inform, but I guess it's reinforcing what I know, but also giving me the opportunity to learn more. It's so cool to look at the S. Loretta of a kid and just sort of see what networks are, what is going on there, and being able to understand that. But and with that, I'm still doing unipolar or bipolar montages primarily, in my training.
And we've talked before about the EEGer community and what what that means to to us. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you mentioned 𝘁𝑗𝚘 earlier. What is that? What's your take on how important that is in your own process and in your own, as a clinician and so
I feel like I have so much to say about that. You know, I'm on an island. I'm in rural Utah, and there are 3 other people in where I am that practice neurofeedback, and then the next neurofeedback practitioner is 4 hours north of me. And so the people that I've met through the EEGer community, early on when I first started doing this and going to the interchange conferences, continue to be lifelines for me. And of course, 𝘁𝑗𝚘. And I think there's just this, there's a similarity in approach. And like what we were talking to earlier, there's so many naysayers out there, and I'm still in situations where I'm at like a DCFS meeting, or if the judge is getting in touch with me about a child or a family that I'm working with, there are still people that look at me like I have 25 eyes when I talk about neurofeedback. And because I don't have a community within like physical space of where I live, it's so validating and so necessary to my work and my spirit to have this EEGer community to go into and just remind me that what we do does work, and it does matter, and that our approach is really whole person, and that's who I've embodied as a practitioner, and EEGer continues to provide me with the opportunity to find other clinicians that practice that way too. So, yeah.
At the risk of being somewhat crassly commercial, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the software. What are you still using EEGer, and what are you've had the opportunity now that you've been doing this for a while to see other softwares, and I wonder if you could share if you have any thoughts about how why this software. Do you ever get inspired where you want to actually look at something else, or what do you like about using EEGer for the process?
I use EEGer for all of the training that I do. I think a big part of it for me, I still feel like it's sort of like why I prefer Apple over PC. Like, I just feel like the interface is really user friendly. When you go into this, I feel like very few mental health practitioners that I've met were also simultaneously technologically savvy. It's like it's a rare combination. And so softwares can be really complex and really frustrating. And I feel like EEGer, for an entry level, makes it accessible and understandable. And even when you have questions, what questions to ask, like just the interface. As I've grown as a clinician, I love the ability to be able to play with my reward and inhibit bands, and how many of those I do in each training. I think that I've started to explore the software a little bit more. And even you mentioned earlier that you've been talking with Kyle, and he's getting, into the nitty gritty, and he's like, oh my gosh, did you know that EEGer did this? So I feel like there's also it's like this endless Christmas tree that I still haven't, I don't know everything yet. And so I think there was a time where you did, it was like a 6-session series, I think. And it was, going into the software. And I think one of my comments in the feedback after was, is there any way that we could have this for clinicians that are more advanced, so that we can understand all of, because I do believe there's so much in this software that I don't even know about that would benefit my work with kids. but you only know what you know. And I don't think I've ever, I know Howard would like say, oh, but I don't think I've ever read like the book, you know, from cover to cover to that tells you all the things that anyway. So yeah. So I can't imagine myself training with a different software at this juncture in my career. Yeah.
I wonder, for folks who are, you know, tuning into our podcast, approaching this, I regularly interact with folks who are, for example, home users who have, you know, they've lived through devastating histories, and they're in that state of like really, you know, looking for answers, really wanting something, some kind of solution. I wonder if you could, if your experience in working with folks who are approaching with, you know, a history of generational trauma, for example, what do you have any thoughts about what that looks like to them? I recognize this is an impossible question in some ways.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, what, you know, in some ways, I guess I like the idea of us, you know, at least people who are working at the boundary of all of this, you know, sort of generational trauma that's going on, that we can at least offer that this is something that we're working at and that we're working on, and we're trying to expand, and we want to do that. You know, is that, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I think it's important to remember that neurofeedback is only one part of the puzzle. I feel like, and I feel like those of us that work with developmental trauma, you know, that we need to be able to lower the expectations of the people that we're working with, and to be able to explain that neurofeedback is one step in the process, and we're going to take it slow and hopefully kind of like take the edge off, you know, be able to soften some of those lines, some of those reactions, some of those emotions, some of those somatic symptoms. So our goal with the neurofeedback is to soften those, but then you also need to make sure that you're working with someone who is really well trained in therapeutic modalities that are endorsed by people who specialize in developmental trauma. I think that it's really hard to do one without the other. And so it's not the holy grail, but it's a part of helping you live a really different life in a way that you probably can't even conceive of at this time.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing that, bringing it in that way. I think partly because I know that you and I both recognize that neurofeedback is not a technological solo solution, that it works, you know, this is from 𝙬𝗓𝙗, right, that there's a therapeutic relationship that's absolutely core to the successful, you know, exploration that comes with neurofeedback. And I think part of the reason that, you know, people could be forgiven for thinking, oh, this is a podcast about neurofeedback, and so it's about this technological solution. But it's always clear to me that for folks who join us, you know, you're working with this technology, but the actual heart of the work that you're doing is in the actual relationship. What 𝙬𝗓𝙗 talks about, the sort of setting up the kind of attachment, addressing the attachment rupture and setting up the attachment bond for the person. Do you feel like I'm capturing that?
100%. Yes. Yeah, it is a tool, but the most, as the, you know, I mentioned Synergetic Play Therapy earlier, and Lisa Dion, the creator of that, always says the most important toy in the room is you know, as the clinician. And I feel that way with neurofeedback. Like the most important part of this process and journey we're embarking on is our relationship. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for doing this today, Kelly. Thanks for watching. If you found something helpful, use a like and subscribe. It helps us with YouTube algorithm and lets us know we're on the right track.